Hello and welcome to today's webcast hosted by the Sales Management Association. Our session will start just in a few minutes. By the way, we welcome your questions and comments during today's session. You may submit them by just clicking on the small text link that you see at the top right of your screen, the webcast video panel. When you do that, you'll be given some instructions on how to enter your information and then submit a question or comment. You can see other questions and comments that way as well. Also, please note, we will be recording today's session. We'll make it available for playback in the Sales Management Association's resource library. Our members will also be able to download slides from today's session there. Our session today is one in a series of web-based Sales Management Association presentations that feature practitioners and thought leaders in the field of Salesforce effectiveness. The Sales Management Association is a professional association for commercial effectiveness, sales operations, and sales leadership professions. We provide our members with research, case studies, training, peer networking, and professional development. If you're joining us for the first time today, we welcome you and invite you to consider membership in the association. You can learn more about membership on our site while you're here at salesmanagement.org. Also, if you're a sales manager or a sales operations professional, you might be interested in our certification programs for these roles. These are enrolling now, and you can learn more about these under the resources tab on our site here at salesmanagement.org. I'm Bob Kelly. I'm Sales Management Association Chairman. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by Ronan Kilroy from eSpatial. Ronan, I'd like to introduce him now. Ronan Kilroy is head of revenue for eSpatial, a firm that markets a mapping software platform for sales, marketing, and operations. His 30 years experience includes 12 years running a sales consultancy focused in Salesforce transformation. Ronan and I, first let me welcome Ronan to the screen.
I'm there. Hi, how are you?
There you are, Ronan. Welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, good to be here again.
Indeed. So let's also point out that Ronan and I will be joined with some expert commentary from two other panelists today, Howard Dover and John Hosbein. I want to introduce them. John Hosbein is a management consultant and expert on CRM implementation and optimization. He's held senior management roles at Kaiser Permanente, Chubb Insurance, and Fireman's Fund, and specializes in aligning data, processes, and technology to boost sales productivity. Howard Dover is the founder and director of University of Texas Dallas's Center for Professional Sales and a clinical professor of marketing there. An energetic thought leader and speaker, Howard also coaches UT Dallas's students in intercollegiate sales competitions and counsels companies on sales effectiveness practices. We will hear from Howard and John in recorded remarks, and I'm happy to have Ronan joining me live today. So let's talk about our session today. We're talking about optimizing sales technology investments. So this is quite a broad topic, and I want to maybe give you some sense of how we will approach the topic. Let's get our slides going here. I want to start with just some guiding principles, some things that we see recurring in being very, very important issues, and that when addressed properly, represent sort of foundational ideas and how to invest effectively in sales technology. So we're going to share those first. Ronan, I'll invite your comment on those. And then from there, we're going to talk about why sales technology often misses the mark. And then we'll dive into some specific areas that we know are crucial, including adoption and how we actually measure value in sales tech. So let's get started. Let's start with some guiding principles around investing in sales technology. So let's see. I say that there are three, perhaps not the only three, but these are three that we find enduring and essential in almost every instance of making investment decisions in sales technology. So the first is make sure that what you're spending money on solves problems that aligns with sales strategy. And by sales strategy, I mean how your salespeople execute and achieve success given their performance goals. That is, make sure that you're implementing things that help salespeople be better at their jobs, perhaps put more simply. Second, make sure that you're defining the value that the firm will receive from the technology investment. Is this a efficiency or cost reduction investment, or is it one that will improve the quality of the sales effort? Will it increase the capacity and productivity of the organization? These things should be explicit. And related, number three is make sure you're fully costing the investment. We see lots of companies forget that technology that requires a lot of salesperson bandwidth is extremely expensive because it reduces sales capacity, the most valuable and largest asset in the sales organization. So if you're asking salespeople to do a lot with a new piece of technology, you need to take that into account as part of the cost equation in the investment. Okay, so let me pause here. Ronan, I'd love your thoughts on this. I'm interested in your perspective.
Yeah, kind of my mind is cast back to a CRM implementation I would have done maybe 20 years ago. So I think maybe many of us would look at these guiding principles and go, they seem very obvious. And I would have said probably the same. But I think it didn't take long. It certainly took less than a year to realize that I didn't really delve into each one of these properly. Didn't really ensure that what we were doing was aligned to sales strategy. We were in a very high growth mode. We didn't really, again, at a high level, we thought we knew what the value was expected, but again, we didn't really put a lot of thought and energy into it. And then that last one, it definitely certainly cost more than we had expected. But and I know we're going to go through this in more detail, but hopefully for people who are on this, they don't make the same mistakes I did, because we had to reevaluate a lot of that a year later and really sit down. We were a lot wiser, but again, these are great principles. It's just how do we put them into action?
Yeah, I think that there are often competing interests, and sometimes there are underrepresented concerns that affect the sales organization. Often others in the organization might be quite free in signing up the sales organization to do things without regard for the impact on the capacity of the organization or just how much trouble this is going to be. So, and you're also, the comment about these things being obvious, I've learned never to underestimate the amount of obvious things that nevertheless are ignored for various reasons. Okay, so let's keep these guiding ideas in mind. Make sure you're solving problems that affect the success of the sales organization. Secondly, make sure you understand the value you expect and quantify that to the extent possible. And thirdly, capture all costs, including those often hidden and overlooked costs that might be associated with diminished sales capacity, taking a lot of time from salespeople. Now let's talk about why sales investments in technology fail. This is a section that you might consider, what does bad look like? And it often looks like this. Actually, we're going to borrow data from research that we've recently concluded on CRM. And the experience of CRM is instructive to us in the broader context of technology. CRM is, of course, the anchoring investment in most sales organizations, and it often represents the single biggest expenditure in sales tech or non-payroll expense in the sales organization. And incidentally, we'll have a session next week revealing this full set of research, but here's a sneak preview of what we've learned. CRM customers are mostly unhappy about their investment. When it asked about adoption, 64% say the CRM in place is underachieving firm expectations around adoption. 57% say it's underachieving firm expectations related to return on investment. And 63% say that they have not realized the full potential of the solution that they've purchased. So these are quite concerning numbers. Again, these relate to CRM. I point a couple things out here. One is that, we found that the firms that were satisfied with adoption didn't have 100% adoption. It's not essential often to have 100% adoption, but those that were satisfied had at least a majority of people using the CRM solution. Secondly, I would point out, let's see, I wanted to point out one other thing. I can't recall now what it is, but we'll perhaps come back to that. So, okay, so again, this is from CRM. And if we are to answer this question, what happens when sales technology fails? We see three themes. The first is poor adoption. The second is the technology doesn't generate sufficient value. And the third is inadequate implementation of the technology. That is, it might be great technology people love to use, but it's poorly implemented, so it fails. Ronan, what do you think? Are we covering off on the main issues associated with?
I would say, yeah, I would say so. And it's an interesting one too, because obviously, when you look at the traits of the users, sometimes I think the behaviors of the outliers can influence the implementation. In other words, you can get people who can perform at a high level and not really follow the system or use the technology to the fullest, and that can almost endanger the whole project in a sense. But adoption as well, I think it's an issue I know we're going to talk about later, but I often how we position a new project, we often don't position it in a way that makes it receptive to the audience. We think about that a lot in sales, what's in it for me when it's a customer, but we may not always think about that when it's users within our own organization who likewise think with the same mindset, though, what's in it for me? And if there isn't a compelling reason, it's hard to motivate.
We're going to dive into that idea a little bit. The ability to drive adoption is often about persuasion. It's about campaign management, and persuasion often. So let's dive into these three areas, specifically adoption, the way we identify and maybe quantify value of technology, and also inadequate implementation. We're going to start first with adoption. Now here, I'd like, before Ronan and I talk further, I want us to hear from our expert commentators, John Hostbein and Howard Dover. Take a listen.
Yeah, there's always going to be a little bit of a tug of war between a system that a salesperson needs to use and their desire to use it. So that user experience, and you can measure that by adoption or satisfaction, is going to be an important element of, is your CRM successful? I would say it shouldn't be the only, because you will require activities from your salespeople that they just may not want to do. They may not want to fill out the update on the latest opportunity. They may not want to complete the contact records with the necessary data. those are things that may be necessary as an organization, but not necessarily directly in line with how they think they're going to close the deal. So one, don't rely only on adoption, but pay close attention to, are your users having an experience that's efficient and that's modern? Those folks that are on old versions of CRM, or those organizations that aren't investing in that user experience, will just see that friction increase and the complaints about your CRM increase.
You can't measure the value until you've measured the adoption. And so the biggest challenge we have out there right now is that if the company is deploying the technology, you've got an adoption problem usually. So that's the first challenge, is that when you look at the waste that's often in the space, it's very hard to determine whether you're actually getting value. Well, I think there's two thoughts here. I think when you look at the bottom up versus the top down approach, I think some of the better technology implementations are going to really come from the bottom up, meaning that the sales managers, the sales contributors are beginning to use a technology, maybe even, not, I don't want to go into unauthorized use, but it definitely using a technology, and so it kind of spreads like contagion within the organization. And I think when you allow that to happen, then you're going to have a better outcome. But whenever we use a top-down approach, right, we're going to use this or that technology. Let's say, if we're going to use a specific coaching technology, for example, there's a lot of word on the street right now that coaching, because of AI, we're going to get all this new coaching opportunities, and I just keep on thinking, well, okay, but we don't really have coaching cultures. So given the fact that we don't have coaching cultures, why the adoption problem is going to come back, right? We have great technology, but who's going to utilize it? If we don't have underlying motion, technology is not going to create world-class behavior just because we put a piece of technology in place.
Okay, so I found Howard's comments especially salient here. So he raises a couple of points. One is sometimes we implement things that the organization isn't ready for or poorly fits. The second thing is often there's this tension between a top-down initiative and one that's really motivated from grassroots, a bottom-up interest in something. So these are two important themes.
Yeah, they both relate to the non-software element, which is the human element. And I often think we underestimate. I mean, like, I'm a salesperson and I average 5 calls a day. All of a sudden I have to adopt a new piece of technology that involves a certain number of steps. It is going to slow me down, and often that human element of the fact that it's slower and that you're learning something new and that impacts your productivity initially creates a lot of natural resistance, I think, frustration and resistance. It does feel when you're getting started that it's twice the work. That's often, I don't think we anticipate that well enough. But those of, if you're regularly hiring people, I think you can see that in practice, how long it does take to learn things and to actually, the whole idea of human learning 20 times minimum, and to have the patience to stick with people. I really like that idea again of, I think it was John said, it needs to be efficient and modern, and I totally agree with that too, because the reality is most of us have devices in our pockets, and our experience of using those is so seamless that we just get very frustrated with stuff that isn't seamless, and so I think that's very important. And that word that Howard had used, contagion, I think that's a very insightful way of thinking about it, because obviously if we can get, like in some ways, there can be a strong case for picking a small group of people who are the early adopters and the people who will embrace something new and change. But that contagion occurs because they're starting to use it, they're starting to see the value, and then the word spreads. And I definitely think that there are often the worst approach to adoption is having a very compressed timeline. And we're often overly, I was too. I mean, I've done it a few times, and you're very ambitious on your timeline, which means that you may not give it enough time. And then it causes a lot of frustration anyway, because you're trying to push to achieve a timeline. So there's a lot of moving pieces to it.
Indeed. Here's some things that support some of the assertions we're making about a number of these points. So first, let's talk about this tension between what management wants to do and what might be attractive or useful to salespeople. So again, we asked the question, 77 large B2B firms. In these firms, 45% say that their salespeople believe that the firm's sales technology investment approach is effective, but 57% of management do. So this kind of illustrates the tilt in the balance of emphasis in many sales technology investments. They are more likely to serve management's interests than the salesperson's. Now, our take on this isn't, it's not necessarily bad. However, without regard for the salesperson's interests, you are greatly diminishing the, likelihood that you'll have widespread adoption, or you're greatly increasing the cost of it because you'll have to literally force people to use the app. So we need to balance these things. These things should, be. There should be substantial emphasis on generating value for salespeople. Here's something else interesting. This is related to CRM. We found that adoption was low. That is, satisfaction with adoption of CRM at the firm level is quite low. But then we also asked firms, well, do you believe that adoption will increase? And 2/3 said yes. Next year, we expect adoption of CRM to increase. Now, this sounds delusional in the extreme to me. This reminds me of the Samuel Johnson quote about second marriages. He said that they are triumphs of hope over experience. And that seems to be consistent with what we see here, especially in light of the next slide. So in the next slide, we actually show results from a question that includes 15 factors. Sorry about how busy this slide is. Let me just try to explain it. First, we asked about 15 things, and we asked firms to rate the importance of these things in driving adoption of CRM. This is a CRM-focused study. And we found that there were very many things that were considered important. In fact, the top 7 things are considered important by 80% or more of firms. They include having managers encourage salespeople to use CRM, making it easy to use. Also, we find that if CRM helps manage the sales pipeline, that's considered very important. 9 out of 10 firms believe that's important, as do 9 out of 10 firms consider it important to have a single source of information in CRM. So very interesting. And then if you look at the next 7 things, that is, the 14 of the 15 things, they're considered, all of these are considered important by a majority of firms. And you see a lot of different things here. Some of it relates to usability. Some of it relates to functionality. Some of it relates to arm twisting, including this enforced accountability, for example. 63% of firms believe it's important to enforce accountability for using CRM. And then, of course, you can see by the red bars, they measure the percentage of firms that consider their efforts effective in these same areas. And those greatly lag the gray bars, the percentage of firms that consider these things important. Firms are least good at the thing actually that matters the fewest, in the fewest amount of firms, and that is providing AI-based guidance. But shortly after that comes this notion of enforced accountability. Firms decline to enforce accountability often, I would guess, or are lousy at doing it. So anyway, there's quite a mixed bag here, and I'll throw it to you, Ronan, for some quick thoughts on what you make of this.
Yeah, I'm not surprised to see management encouragement at the top of that. I do think it's it's critical. I mean, look, I suppose where it can go wrong is that it's a leadership led a leadership led project rather than getting buy-in from everyone. So you do need that management encouragement. I do think what's linked with that, and we talk about ease of use and pipeline management. One of the things that I think is sometimes we say that a system is not necessarily easy to use, but part of that can be down to the fact that we have such a long list of requirements for salespeople to fulfill that we may inhibit their ability to actually do it easily. We can set our CRMs up or a piece of technology up so that it's actually we make it hard to use, not necessarily just a restriction of the technology itself. I think the fact that there's 15 up there also really does highlight that there's a lot of things we need to think about when we're investing in a piece of software,
especially when it comes to CRM. Now, there's certain other applications that are less. They have less of a burden. And for example, we've done research on sales performance management applications. These are platforms that are mostly involved with managing incentive compensation plans. And so salespeople encounter these when they get earnings statements, and they are very much interested in those and participate in those. And the same is also true with sales enablement software, so-called. These are applications that help salespeople find things that are important, useful, that allow them to learn things in context when they need it, and find presentations and marketing pieces. And so those have very high adoption and very high satisfaction and ROI, by the way. CRM is a little more problematic because it's serving largely management's interests as opposed to salespeople's in so many organizations. It's worth asking the question when we look at this list, which of these matters the most? Which of them has the greatest impact on adoption? We have some data there to share, again, in maximum eye strain format here. So let me also try to explain this table. It shows the same 15 factors, and we separated the population of these 80 firms into two groups. Those that were ineffective at a specific factor, and those that were effective at it. And then we compared the percentages of those two groups' satisfaction with their CRM user adoption. So we find that the firms that are ineffective at having managers encourage salespeople to use CRM, just 8% of them were satisfied with CRM user adoption, compared to 51% of firms where managers encouraged salespeople. So now this is worth, and I think that factor at the top of this list is rather obvious. If your manager doesn't care about it, you'd almost be irresponsible. And if you cared about it, it doesn't make much sense for you to care about it either. So, but let's look at the ones just below that. We find that one of the factors that has a large impact is when CRM helps with forecasting or is the single source of information. I'm going to do my best to use this pen here. But these are the things we're looking at. And it helps manage the sales pipeline. So you might ask, aren't these management concerns? But in fact, what we see here with this data is that salespeople are required to do these things. They are required to forecast. In some firms, it's quite a time-intensive activity. What CRM does is allow them to do it faster. And so it is thereby seen as a time-saving, very useful tool for salespeople and managers alike. So interesting distinction here with those things that are driving adoption in CRM. There's something else, a couple other points here to make. Again, just pulling forward some of this CRM research. One is that for CRM anyway, it's important to have an integrated platform. The value of this should be self-evident, but it means that salespeople have fewer places to go. This can improve efficiency and usability of all the suite of technology that we're asking salespeople to use these days. So where, first of all, we find that just 42% of firms have this sort of single platform strategy in place. And furthermore, we find that when firms use CRM as an integrated platform, they are much more likely to have high adoption. Not a surprise here, but 47% of firms who have a single platform in their CRM are satisfied with user adoption, compared to less than half that, just 24% of firms, where they're pursuing this kind of dog's breakfast approach, where you have lots of different apps, lots of places to sign on, etc. And then lastly on this piece, I'd just point out this slide, which shows we ask firms, why do your salespeople use CRM? And we find that 32% of firms say, well, the salespeople use CRM because we make them. They do it to comply with management demands. This is the predominant reason, right? Another 26% say, well, it's valuable to salespeople. That's why they use it. And then the predominant reason is that they do these things in equal proportion, which is the case in 42% of firms. 42% of firms say their salespeople use CRM in part because they get value from it, and in part because management makes them, and those two things are roughly equal in proportion. What's really interesting, though, is in the chart on the right, we see that those firms where CRM is used for the predominant reason that it's valuable to salespeople, the adoption of CRM, that is, the percentage of firms satisfied with the level of adoption, is much greater. It's 2x those firms where management simply makes people do it. So this is an argument for a grassroots effort to demonstrate the value of technology and to use the value provided to salespeople as the way of pulling adoption, as opposed to mandating it. What do you think, Ronan?
Yeah, I suppose, again, it might seem one of those seemingly really obvious things, but and sometimes I think there can be a disconnect that where with CRM we may not be really positioning the value of the CRM to the user in a way that benefits them. It's like, I wrote this down when John was speaking, but like ultimately, when you're out there, and we've all been there, is it going to make my life easier? And I, as somebody who is a massive advocate for using a CRM, there are so many ways you can use it that really do save time and help you with forecasting and deal management and all of the kind of stuff that we have to do. But I think it's finding a way it's really trying to find a way to bring people around to actually seeing the value for themselves, because the enforcement issue, it just doesn't seem to, it doesn't have the same effect, you know. And you know, when you look at an average CRM and you go in and you look at users, which is something I do a lot, is you will see huge variance in how people use the CRM. And I think a lot of the time too, people are not necessarily aware of other little tricks and hacks and things that they can use that replace things they may be doing manually or in other areas. So I think there's a big job there to really win the users over, because there's just no doubt that the value is there for them when they do use it.
Yeah. So finding footholds of user value is so important to communicating why, you know, we ask salespeople to use a tool like CRM. On the other hand, there are some applications that are naturally just sort of engineered to provide immediate value right out of the box. I mean, let's, you know, in deference to your kind support of our organization, let's talk just for a minute about eSpatial. eSpatial is a point solution. It's by no means as much a platform solution as CRM, but it does something very specific that helps field-based salespeople in a way that is immediately apparent.
Yeah, and obviously I'm very biased, but I mean, it certainly, what it does is it does help you make better decisions faster. And I think one of the things that we all know is that, so if you're in your CRM, you have a lot of data, but when you plot things and visualize things like customers on a map, and you have the ability to zoom in and actually see locations and maybe you know, plan routes and do things that would be quite difficult to do outside of using a map. That visual intelligence, it's just immediate. And again, it's because it's a simple workflow. It doesn't have to be a complex workflow to bring a bit of extra insight into people's territory knowledge and you know, route optimization.
One of the more interesting findings from this research that we'll share next week related to CRM is that we found there were, you know, a few markers for really effective CRM implementations. And one of them was just a simple thing. It was that it saves salespeople time. And I think this is can be applied to any technology that you expect people to pick up and use, especially in the sales organization. If it saves them time and can do something as well or better than the existing approach, you've got the wind in at your back and driving adoption. So
the only thing again, I think what mitigates and what makes that hard is that, again, at the top level, that all makes total sense. But initially, I think for everyone, it feels longer. It does take longer. And it's almost like there's a certain level of effort we all have to apply to get to a point where suddenly it's no longer a chore. It's like where these things become unconscious to us and easy. And I think that initial phase of trying to get change, because that you're asking people to change a habit with a new piece of software, and that's never as easy as we think. So it's almost like there's a hump we all have to get over, and there's a certain time and level of effort and what that we need to anticipate, and we also need to anticipate that there's going to be some pushback as well. But to get people to a point where, oh, this no longer feels like it's an add-on to my day. It's actually, I can really see that this is saving me time.
Yeah, let's not ignore the fact that it requires a fair amount of selling and persuasion when we ask people to use technology, just as it does when we ask the firm to spend money on technology. Yeah. We're often, constructing business cases. And so the next topic that I want to deal with relates to assessing technology and also quantifying the value of what we're spending money on. So there are a few things here to think about. Let's talk about a couple of topics, and then I'm going to have us return to comments from John and from Howard Dover. First of all, we often default to an ROI estimate. So this is highly, for it to be believable, it's highly dependent on, saving or recapturing economic value, and often the value that's generated is not necessarily financial. It is in other areas. It relates to productivity, or it might even relate to developing an important capability. Very, very difficult to assign a financial number to that. So often we rely too much on so-called ROI, and often we also overvalue certain things that aren't really important. We'll talk more about that in a moment. So also, it's worth pointing out that things are changing. Sometimes the things that we paid for that were a good investment are too expensive because the technology has changed, but perhaps our solution hasn't. I truly believe we're going to see quite a lot of this with AI and its ability to replace many of the applications that firms are spending a lot of money on. Particularly, I think sales enablement platforms are vulnerable to low-cost AI solutions that can be trained and deployed in-house, and same with a lot of training applications and probably many others. Nevertheless, when we listen to the remarks from John and Howard, we'll hear Howard actually opine a little bit on this topic of what's happening in the marketplace of commercial providers of solutions. So let's take a listen.
The other parts of your CRM that are going to be important is how well do you manage your process and how well can you measure your process. That's not necessarily going to be a user experience, but it's going to be, does your CRM reflect your sales process and your sales methodology effectively, so you can understand the impact of changes and also measure it and measure your people and how they're being successful. So those are two areas that I would focus on.
I think you got to ask yourself, what are we doing this for? Is this around a compliance framework? Like, we need the data so that we can get better at prediction or ICP measurement or whatever the case may be? Or are we trying to do this to truly enhance the salesperson's ability to generate income either more effectively or more efficiently? Because I think a lot of the technology we put in place, I was talking to somebody around one of these coaching platforms back in April at a national conference. And I kind of said, hey, we could really do a lot of things with conversation intelligence and AI actually helping to augment the capacity of the individual seller. And the person said, yeah, like 95% of my clients are actually asking me to deploy it in a compliance framework to make sure that the methodology they spent millions of dollars on is actually being used. And so once again, I don't know that it's the technology itself, Bob. I think it's the fact of, is the existing system well designed? Because if it isn't, we throw technology in it, and I don't think it's going to do a whole lot. So I do think you have to look at what is our intention. And don't get me wrong, we do need visibility into the pipeline. We need visibility towards our KPIs, but that's never going to excite the frontline sales organization.
And you want to, I'd say it's a sales tech investment, of which CRM is going to be one. So if you're looking at what's going to justify the dollars, putting it into an ROI and understanding the return on those dollars is critical. Or I'd say is important to pressure test your rationale. Inside of that ROI, you're going to be pointing to attributes of your sales environment that create a return. Those are going to be improvements in your process. It's going to be increased volume. It's going to be increased productivity. It's going to be different behaviors from your sales staff. So the ROI is a reflection of the benefits you're creating in your people, in your process, in your data. So think of it as a as a portal into describing the value beyond just a number that is a dollar return. So that's how I would think about it. That does require that as you think about these investments, you need to build what I'd call a sales infrastructure, which is not a technology infrastructure, that has systems and system names in it. It really is about functions that your sales organization executes that creates the performance that you need to achieve. So whether that is better lead gen, whether that is better compensation, whether that is better planning, those are functions that you need to execute. And your ROI is going to be a way that you can describe the improvements you're making and the financial return that they should expect. I think what's unique to a sales investment is that the link between a dollar return and a dollar investment is often based on somebody's knowledge of the sales process. And that's not going to be a straight line calculation. So there's a story and a strategy behind your investment that has to be told along with the number you're providing. That's why I treat ROI as a minimum necessary part of your evaluation. It is how you can impact your sales process, your sales force, or those specific functions that you need to improve. So that's the approach that I would take. You talk about how to attach value to it. If you understand your sales environment well, you're going to know the expected improvement of the investment you're making. So let's take lead gen. Let's say your investment you're making is going to be in CRM and it's going to be attaching external data to your profiles of your potential clients. That should both increase the volume and throughput of your pipeline. You can put numbers against that and evaluate what type of return you should expect. And your job is to figure out a reasonable return for that investment and then compare that to other choices you have or other choices that the executives you're presenting to have. Yeah, I think if I look at a technology investment, don't look at it as a singular investment. It should be part of your building blocks that are going to equal a successful sales force. So a CRM is one component of it, but I've mentioned others, whether it's planning or quota allocation or territory management. Those are all building blocks of a successful organization, just like content management or training. And so as you think about your technology investment, think about it in context of that environment and that the investment you're making is playing a role that is additive to this environment and will enable you to make the next investment effectively. So that decision of a single investment needs to be described and understood in the context of your sales, I'll say sales strategy, although it's probably a very worn out term. I would say sales infrastructure, which is that combination of data, of process, of people, and of functions that run your sales force.
So I think there is an event or a series of events that occurred in 2022, 2023 that really kind of took the foundation out of the SaaS space. And when I say that, we have to then move that over to the sales technology because sales technology is in the SaaS space. So the venture capital pulled out as interest rates went up. So it kind of created a venture capital drought. And in the process of that, a lot of this euphoric investment in the sales technology dissipated. Now we're seeing that masked a little bit with the AI explosion, but I think some of the things that people may want to take a look at a little bit is, number one, if the VCs are not funding non-AI, then is the current app that I'm really relying on even going to be available? Because the number of layoffs that occurred within the sales tech sector was about 2.5 million over the last 18 months. And so if you look at that, you're going to look at that and say, well, wait a minute, I have less seats and I have less venture capital. So my two sources of funding, renewals and VC funding rounds, has just kind of fell out from under me. So even existing technologies that are not in a good place, even if they're really great, there's a question of viability. So consolidation in the space is going to be pretty aggressive and companies are just going to dissipate. Now, there's a whole bunch of new AI tools that are coming out, and it's just exploding the tech landscape. We had a 40% increase in the number of logos in the sales technology landscape, and most of that is being driven by AI. But they're nimble and they don't need as many resources, so it's actually kind of a risky, and if you're used to things being shifty and agile, it's like quicksand right now.
Yeah, so a lot to get our heads around there. So we have an environment a vendor environment, which is being there's a lot of turmoil there because of the financial markets and just because of the somewhat tenuous nature of the value many of these firms provide in the SaaS world, and compounded by this, impact of AI and these very disruptive new set of technologies coming in. So, and then of course, then we have the enduring problems that you heard about earlier in that clip. So, what's your take on this topic, Ronan? How do we sort through figuring out where value resides when we make these investments?
I like John's. It's funny, it's turbo juice, but I like it that the idea of the sales infrastructure but that it is designed ultimately to really support the field team, and to think about it as not just a piece of a technology in isolation. It has other moving parts. I think the other thing as well is to think to a degree, like for those companies that have had a challenge in implementations, is to maybe rethink the scope of what they of what's actually possible, or possibly what's even needed. I personally have seen CRM setups that are so unbelievably complex that it's not surprising that some people spend 35% of their day in admin. So it's almost like reimagining, if you have existing technology, reimagining how that could be used, where you're actually pulling out data of consequence and not just data for the sake of data. What data actually matters? What should we capture that matters most? And maybe honing in a little bit on that to get greater levels of adoption. And then, as John says, to really think about the value of new technologies in terms of that infrastructure piece where you are supporting.
Yeah, good. Yeah, my takeaway also is when it comes to these initiatives that are chiefly driven by compliance, the need to have everyone using the same software, where the value to the salesperson is not apparent, they tend to overstate often the value of those initiatives. That is, we might ask for a lot of data that we don't really need, but someone thinks it's nice to have, but that someone has completely overlooked the cost that those initiatives come with, which is huge impact on sales capacity. And so these are all traps and ghosts that we lunge at, related to value and technology that I think are important to point out. Well, we have just a few minutes. I want to cover off on our last topic, which is implementation. We just have a few things to emphasize here. And I would describe them thusly. There are, problems related to what you might call table stakes requirements to be successful in technology. This often shows up with data. That is, we just don't have the right data to make this application work, yet we implement it anyway. But it's true also of process and other underlying things. And then the second is just a lack of preparation. Are these things that you often see in your own experience, Ronan?
Yeah, absolutely. And from my own personal experiences, which is one of the reasons why I think I do have more gray hairs than yours, because I've fallen short on both.
Yeah.
I may have more, but there's certainly there's none of the original color. No, I definitely I think one of if you're a natural optimist like me, optimism is often your enemy in when you're designing projects that you want to get implemented correctly. And that can be optimism in the level of scope and optimism in timeline. And sometimes it just requires that extra little thought process of really think. I think one of a great exercises often is to spend more time thinking about why it could go wrong than how it can go right, because it does help you start to think about the implementation challenges you will have, because you're going to have them.
Yeah, this is a message for senior leaders who push without taking care to understand the impact of a poor implementation, which can be very costly. Okay, well, I'll draw us to a close. We're sadly out of time. I wanted to thank you very much, Ronan, for your insights and time today. Any closing thoughts before we sign off?
Yeah, I think I had written down here. I must find the quote. Yeah, I think Howard actually said culture, and I do think it does come back to that. Like if we have a culture of compliance, we're going to struggle to really tackle the issue of adoption. But if we have a culture where I think we allow some degree of flexibility, and a culture where we're focusing on the value these things can create for the users, that's a totally different story. And I really like that. I wrote that down because I do think it's right. I do think it's quite powerful.
Well, thank you. And thank you again for your insight. Also, thank you to our two recorded panelists, John Hosbein and Howard Dover from University of Texas at Dallas. I will, before we sign off, remind our audience of our next Sales Management Association presentation. That's coming up October 15th, when we'll present a session called Cold Outreach is Dead. Long live cold outreach. You can learn more about this session on our website. Or of course, you could wait for us to cold call you to remind you. Probably not going to do that, though. Yeah, we don't really do that. So anyway, take a look at this session and many others under the Events tab on our site. I'm Bob Kelly, Sales Management Association Chairman. Thank you for your time and attention today. Goodbye until next time.
Thanks, Bob.